I drove up to my mountain cabin to prepare it for rental, expecting an empty house and a quiet meeting with the realtor. Instead, I found my daughter-in-law's parents inside, drinking my wine, eating on my heirloom table, and laughing with 3 relatives like they owned the place. Brenda smiled and said Sarah told us we could stay. This house will be hers eventually anyway. I didn't yell. I didn't explain myself. I just looked at the mess turned around and decided everyone was about to learn the difference between family and ownership. I pulled up to my cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, spare key gripped tightly in my hand. My plan for the day was simple: meet with the real estate agent and get the place staged for a long-term rental. But as I turned the lock, I didn't find silence. I heard loud laughter and the unmistakable clink of glassware. Stepping into the living room, I froze. There sat my daughter-in-law, Sarah's parents, Brenda and Larry, along with 3 of their cousins. They were lounging on my furniture, toasting each other with my best bottle of Cabernet. Greasy pizza boxes were scattered across the heirloom cherrywood coffee table, a piece that had been in my family for generations. Brenda looked up at me and let out a sharp laugh, not even bothering to stand. "Diane, what are you doing here? Sarah told us we could crash here for a few weeks. I mean, the place was just sitting empty, right?" I felt a sharp sting in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was pure, cold disappointment in my son, Jason. He knew exactly what this house meant to me. He knew I was counting on the rental income for my retirement fund. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream, and I didn't ask for an explanation. I walked into the kitchen and surveyed the damage, a sink full of crusty dishes and crumbs everywhere. Brenda followed me, swirling her wine. "Don't get your feathers ruffled," she said with a smirk. "Sarah said the house is basically going to be hers and Jason's eventually anyway. We're just getting a head start on enjoying the inheritance." She grinned at me as if I were a nagging houseguest in my own home. In that moment, I made a choice. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to try to reason with her. I'm 68 years old. I have plenty of patience for painting and gardening, but I don't have a single second left for disrespect. I turned around without a word and walked out. Brenda yelled after me, asking if I could at least take the trash out on my way. They thought I had given up. They thought quiet Diane was going home to have a good cry. They had no idea I was already mentally auditing every single bank authorization I had ever signed. On the drive back to Charlotte, Jason called 3 times. I let it ring. My son isn't a bad person, but he's like putty in Sarah's hands. He avoids conflict by giving away my generosity. When I got back to my townhome, I made a cup of tea. My house was quiet, orderly, and mine. I intended to keep it that way. Sarah had always mistaken my silence for weakness. She managed the family budget, she dictated Jason's career moves, and she had already started claiming my furniture. "That piece is a bit dated, Diane," she'd say, while eyeing my antiques. I used to just nod. But today, the thread snapped. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the joint savings account I had set up for Jason and the grandkids. It was my money, $60,000, intended as a down payment for their first house. Jason had signatory power, but legally, the principal was mine. I transferred every cent back into my private account. It wasn't theft. It was the revocation of a gift that was no longer appreciated. Next, I messaged the cleaning service I'd used for the cabin for years. I canceled their sessions for the next month. If Brenda and her crew wanted to live there, they could scrub their own filth. I also logged into my utility portal and canceled the autopay for the cabin. Electricity, water, gas, by next month, the accounts would be closed. I set my tablet aside and took a deep breath. My pulse was steady. The hardest part was still to come. The conversation where Sarah realized the inheritance was officially off the table. The next morning, Sarah was at my door. She burst in without knocking, her face flushed red. "Diane, what the hell was that yesterday? My mother is devastated. You just walked out without saying a word. They feel completely unwelcome." I calmly continued watering my African violets. I didn't even look up. "They are unwelcome, Sarah. It's my house." Sarah let out a scoffing laugh. "We're family, Jason. And I agreed they could stay there. We thought you'd be happy the house was being used." I set the watering can down and looked her dead in the eye. "Jason has no right to give away my property, and neither do you." Sarah crossed her arms. "You're being so selfish. That house is going to be ours anyway. Why are you making such a drama out of this?" "Later isn't now," I said quietly. "And whether it will ever be yours is a decision I make every single day." Sarah snorted. "Speaking of decisions, Jason saw the savings account is empty." "What is that about?" "We were supposed to sign the contract for the new house next week." I sat down at the kitchen table and pointed to the chair across from me. She stayed standing. "That money was a gift with strings attached," I explained. "The string was mutual respect. Since you've decided to use my cabin as a party pad for your relatives without asking, I assume you no longer need my financial support. You're clearly independent enough to manage my assets, so you can manage your own down payment." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She looked for a sharp comeback, but my lack of an emotional reaction unnerved her. She was used to me folding the moment she raised her voice. But today, the room was cold. She had no idea this was only the beginning of the restructuring. Sarah stormed out and slammed the door. A few hours later, Jason showed up. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. He sat in the kitchen, in the exact spot where he used to do his homework as a kid. "Mom, does it have to be like this? Sarah is losing it. Her parents won't leave the cabin, and now we don't have the money for the house." I pushed a plate of cookies toward him. "Jason, did you give them the key?" He avoided my gaze. "Sarah said it would be fine. They just needed a change of scenery." I nodded slowly. "And did you ask them why they're drinking my wine and damaging my furniture?" Jason was silent. He knew he was in the wrong. "I've already hired a realtor," I said. "The first walkthrough for long-term tenants is next week. Your in-laws need to be out by Sunday night." Jason shook his head. "They can't do that. Brenda already unpacked everything. They said they're staying for at least 3 weeks. I gave him a thin smile. "Then they'll be sitting in the dark, starting Monday. I've canceled the utilities." Jason looked at me horrified. "You can't do that." "I can, Jason. My name is on the bills. I am not paying for a vacation for people who laugh at me in my own home." I stood up, ending the conversation. I didn't give him a chance to beg or negotiate. I had set the deadline. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace, but peace based on being a doormat isn't peace at all. As I lay in bed, I planned my next move. If they thought I was just grandma with the checkbook, they were about to learn a lesson in boundaries. On Sunday, I was driving back to the mountains not to argue, but to change the locks. I drove up to the cabin Sunday evening. I had a locksmith meet me at the gravel driveway. As I pulled up, the lights were blazing in the living room. I could hear music. They still thought I was bluffing. I got out of the car, thanked the locksmith, and walked to the door. Brenda opened it wearing a bathrobe and holding a glass of red wine. "Diane, back again. We told you we're staying through the month." I ignored her and stepped inside, followed by the locksmith. "What is this? Who is This man, Brenda shrieked. I answered calmly, "This is Mr. Miller. He's here to change the deadbolts on the front and back doors." Larry appeared behind Brenda, looking visibly tipsy. "You can't kick us out. It's Sunday night." I checked my watch. "It's 8 p.m. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your bags. Anything left in this house after that will be considered trash or donated to Goodwill tomorrow morning." The locksmith was already unscrewing the hardware. The metallic grinding sound drowned out Brenda's screeching. They scrambled for their phones, calling Sarah. I could hear her screaming through the speakers that I had gone insane. But I just stood in the hallway, hands in my coat pockets, watching the scene like a neutral observer. The emotion was gone. It was just logistics now. In the chaos, Brenda began frantically stuffing her clothes into plastic bags. Larry cursed while looking for his shoes. They had no power over me because I had stopped asking for their approval. Once the new locks were in and the 5 of them were standing on the driveway with their luggage in the chilly night air, Mr. Miller handed me the new keys. I locked the door from the inside and turned off the porch light. I watched through the window as they stood there fuming before finally piling into their cars. Silence returned. Real silence. Monday morning, I met the realtor. The house was a mess, but the structure was fine. I hired a professional cleaning crew and had a separate lock installed on the wine cellar. When I got back to Charlotte, Jason was waiting in my hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. "Mom, what did you do? Brenda and the others had to check into a cheap motel. Sarah has been screaming at me for hours. She says you humiliated them." I opened my door and let him in. "I didn't humiliate anyone, Jason. I protected my property. If your wife wants to host her parents, she can do it in her own apartment or pay for their hotel herself." Jason sat at the table. "We don't have money for a hotel and the down payment for the house. The closing costs are due. If we don't pay, we lose the house." I sat across from him. "That's unfortunate. But since you're both adults and Sarah feels she's the CEO of your lives, I'm sure you'll find a way. Maybe her parents can help out." Jason laughed bitterly. "You know they don't have a dime. They live way beyond their means." I nodded. "Exactly like you were planning to do with my money. Jason, I'm willing to help, but under new terms. I'm not financing a life where Sarah dictates the rules, and I'm just the ATM. I laid a paper on the table. I drafted it that morning. It wasn't a complex legal document, just a private agreement. I will release the down payment funds, but the mountain cabin will be managed by a rental agency from now on. Neither of you gets a key. And Sarah will give me a written apology for her disrespect. Until then, the account stays closed." Jason stared at the paper. He knew Sarah would rather bite her tongue off than apologize, but he also knew I wasn't budging. For the next 2 weeks, there was radio silence. Sarah tried a different tactic. She sent me photos of the grandkids and messages about how much they missed their Nana. It was classic manipulation. It hurt not to see them, but I knew giving in now would ruin everything. I replied briefly, "I miss them too. As soon as the business with the cabin is settled, I'd love for them to visit." Then came the day the option on their new house expired. Jason called me, his voice shaking. "Mom, Sarah won't apologize. She says you're a tyrant. We lost the house. The sellers backed out." I felt a brief pang of sadness for my son, but I held firm. "That was your choice, Jason. Pride doesn't pay the mortgage." Shortly after, the tone changed. Brenda and Larry had to leave the motel because they ran out of cash. They tried to squeeze into Jason and Sarah's small 2-bedroom apartment. Suddenly, their home was cramped, loud, and chaotic. The perfect family image Sarah projected to the world started to crack. Brenda actually called me. She tried flattery first, then accusations. I just hung up. I blocked her number. I wasn't that Diane anymore, the one who spent hours justifying her life. I spent my afternoons at the art museum or catching up with old friends. I realized how much energy I'd wasted managing other people's moods. One evening, Jason showed up alone. He had a suitcase. "I can't do it, Mom. The house is full of her relatives. They're all fighting about money, and Sarah blames me for everything." I stepped aside and let him in. "You can stay in the guest room, Jason. But one condition: we don't talk about Sarah, and we don't negotiate about money. This is my sanctuary." He nodded, looking relieved. The power dynamic had officially shifted. Jason stayed with me for 3 days. He saw how peaceful my life was, how structured and independent. He began to see how Sarah had isolated him to keep control. On the 4th day, Sarah came over. She didn't burst in this time. She knocked. When I opened the door, she looked haggard. Her hair was a mess, and that smug look was gone. "Is Jason here?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "He's still asleep." She started to step in, but I stayed in the doorway. "What do you want, Sarah?" She swallowed hard. "My parents moved out. They drove up to stay with my brother in Virginia. It was a nightmare." I said nothing. I just waited. Silence was my best tool. "I'm sorry," she finally said. It sounded forced, like it pained her to say it, but she said it. "I'm sorry about the cabin and how my mother acted. I shouldn't have let it happen." I looked at her for a long moment. "That's a start, Sarah, but an apology without a change in behavior is just noise." I let her in. The 3 of us sat at the table. I laid out my plan. The savings account for the grandkids would stay, but I would be the sole trustee. There would be no cash for luxuries or to bail out her relatives. If they wanted to find a new house, I would help with the monthly payments, but the deed would stay in my name for the first 5 years. Sarah started to protest, but she looked at Jason. For the first time, he didn't jump to her defense. He just looked at her and said, "Mom's right. We blew it." Sarah lowered her head. She realized the days of using me as a passive bank were over. I wasn't the old woman to be ignored anymore. I was the one who held the keys to the life they wanted to lead. The months that followed were a period of adjustment. Sarah followed the rules, even though I could tell it took everything she had. The mountain cabin was now leased to a lovely couple from Atlanta. The rental income went straight into my account, securing a lifestyle I'd only dreamed of. I organized a family dinner at a nice local bistro. Not pizza in a box, but a proper sit-down meal. Brenda and Larry were not invited. Sarah accepted this without a word. During dinner, we talked about the kids and school. It was polite, civilized. I noticed Jason starting to make his own choices again. He signed up for a certification course that Sarah used to call a waste of time. I helped him pay for it, but I sent the check directly to the school. Control was the only way to ensure my money went where it actually built something. One afternoon, Sarah came over by herself. She brought flowers, nothing expensive, but she'd put thought into them. "I wanted to say thanks, Diane, for taking Jason in when things were so bad at our place." I took the flowers. I love my son, Sarah, but I also love myself. That's the difference between now and then. She looked at me with something close to admiration. "How did you do it, just staying so cold when we were all ganging up on you?" I smiled. I wasn't cold. I was just clear. When you know what belongs to you and what you're worth, you don't need heat to defend yourself. A little light is plenty. In that moment, we reached a new level. We weren't best friends. but there was a mutual recognition of territory. Today, I'm sitting on my patio looking out at my garden. My phone is next to me, but it's no longer a source of stress. I've learned that you can say no without giving a footnote of excuses. I've learned that while blood makes you related, respect is the only currency that keeps a family together. My cabin in the mountains is in good hands. The tenants send me photos of the yard occasionally, and they treat the place with care. Jason and Sarah are in a beautiful home that I co-signed for. They know that my support is tied to their behavior. Some might call that harsh, but for us, it's the sturdiest structure we've ever had. I haven't heard from Brenda since that Sunday night. I hear she talks trash about me to anyone who will listen, but the echo doesn't reach me here. I don't care. I didn't find my peace through a hugs and kisses reconciliation. I found it by taking back my autonomy. I'm not the victim of greedy relatives. I'm the architect of my own golden years. Sometimes I drive up to the mountains when the tenants are away on vacation. I sit on the porch with a glass of wine and just soak in the quiet. The old cherry furniture is exactly where it belongs. It smells like pine and fresh air, not stale pizza. I realized you have to be willing to risk everything, even the relationship with your only child, to save the truth. Jason respects me more now than he ever did, because I showed him what a person with a backbone looks like. I'm Diane. I'm 69 years old, and I'm never giving away my keys again. I'm free. And that freedom is the best inheritance I could ever leave myself.